could focus more on reconciling the laws of the market with laws of nature and the reaction of policy in terms of the green economy mechanism or carbon credits. And how would you criticize that? Because to a certain extent, it's not in correspondence to environmental ethical principles of stewardship or rights of future generations.
Question. Could you repeat that just for me?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. So the question was basically if you could flesh out more about the reconciliation between the laws of the market with laws of nature. Because one of the policy reactions to that has been the carbon credit mechanism or the green economy mechanism now with biodiversity. So if you could criticize that and also sort of touch upon how can this be done in correspondence to principles of environmental ethics, you know, like those stated by Thomas Berry as well as principles of stewardship and others.
Is there an easier question out there? Well, that's a very good question, and I think your question is right at the heart of the issue. And I think the point is this. We pay for sustainable development, whether we get it or not. So the issue is not whether somebody pays for this. The issue is who pays, when, and how. So an example in our country, electricity is said to be cheap, but it doesn't include the cost of the person living downstream or downwind from a coal-fired power plant that dies 10 years early because he was inhaling or she was inhaling particulate matter coming out of that smokestack. So the fact that we pay an average of 9 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity does not include that cost. So you can't avoid having ethics involved in that. That's simply an unfair pricing mechanism. In some fashion, these two factors have to be reconciled. And I think the point of the issue around climate is they will be reconciled in some way. Our national sport is baseball, and so you have batters that come to bat. It's not at all like cricket. Well, it's something like cricket. But you have batters that come to bat, and it's said in kind of a joking way that nature bats last. It doesn't matter how we calculate things because nature will sooner or later resolve all of this. So our choice is to accommodate, build an economy that's calibrated to the way nature works, and not one that we try to force nature to fit into our mental preconceptions. Thanks for including ethics in this also, because I think one of the ironies of economics was this Scotsman, Adam Smith, was first of all a moral philosopher. And Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, but he wrote it after he had written a book on morality. And then he died after he wrote that. Just before he died, he was revising the book on the moral economy. And so it's kind of ironic. And if you read his big, thick book, The Wealth of Nations, there was a lot of stuff about ethics in it. But it wasn't what we took out of it. And so I think one of the issues of sustainability has got to be that we make a moral economy. And we hold people accountable. And that is, and we hold ourselves accountable. In a good many ways, the economy we created is at the expense of other people. And it's just terribly ironic that the wealth taken from India in the 18th and 19th century was what fueled the first round of industrialization as this model of growth and development went viral around the whole planet. And now it's caught on, but at the same time now there are other ideas also beginning to go viral about economies that can be sustained and factories that can begin to recycle what they do. And a good friend of Elaine and mine, Ray Anderson, started a company called Interface Carpet. and you think of carpet or rugs on the floor. And typically the way you do that is you take crude oil from Saudi Arabia and you render that into fiber that you make into a carpet, and then you sell it to a customer, and then when the customer's done with it, it goes to a landfill. A landfill is just where we dump stuff. And so the landfill, the life of that carpet in a landfill, it could be 10 or 20,000 years. No one really knows, but it's longer than the, we're capable of thinking. So Ray Anderson had a different idea, to make a company powered, first of all, by current sunshine. Have your factories begin to, be powered by solar collectors. And then secondly, make a carpet that isn't sold to customers, it's leased to customers, which means that you're going to get it back. When you get the product back, you want to make it in a way that you want to get it back. So that means you've arranged the molecules in a way that they can be disassembled and then reassembled into new carpet and then leased back to a customer. So it never goes to a landfill. That's a model of the economy. We know how to make that economy. And for the most part, it means getting off fossil fuels and leaving oil, which has incredibly complex molecules that are very useful for lots of other things. Instead of burning it, you're keeping it for those higher uses. But thanks for the question. I appreciate that.
David, the situation is different in needs, but not necessarily viable in India. But the first question is, how do I get my daily food? So many questions in this, people exactly in this town asking me.
So that if you follow U.S. politics, you're aware, for example, that some 400 of the wealthiest people in the United States control more wealth, not income, but wealth, than the bottom 150 million. So in this paradoxical model of development, I think what we're moving toward is a world that has a very thin strata of hyper-wealthy people and a middle class that is probably going to shrink and a poor class that is going to grow. That is a prescription, I think, for war, for terrorism, for all kinds of conflict, and not just inequity. So the model, I don't see a world, and I've got to be critical of my own country here, not unduly, but I think I have to be critical of the role the United States has played of late in this dialogue. This big word sustainability is an umbrella word that will have very different meanings in Bangalore and cities in the United States. But I think it will converge. It has got to be a model that eventually is equitable, acceptable to most everybody, is highly transparent, which I hope is democratic. And I hope it is a world that we can eliminate a good bit of conflict. It's a world where security is built in and broadened, so it includes access to meals, food, health care, shelter, education, and so forth. But your point is well taken. Thank you for that.
I would like to add something to this. In a country where the first focus is on survival or not on living, like in India, the people here would question earth destruction, climate change. It's not an issue. So many people tell me here, I live today. I don't care about tomorrow. I live today, and not tomorrow I'm dead. That's the thing. In the United States, we say, what world do we leave to our children? That's not what the people tell me here. They just say, how I survive today, how I meet tomorrow. It's survival of the fittest. If you don't win today, you're dead. We don't have that scenario in the United States.
Well, again, thanks. I think we do have it in the United States, and I think it's growing in the United States. And I think the income, the collapsing of the middle class, unless it is quickly reversed, means that our future is very much as you described the reality here. So, and there's several ways also, it seems to me, to arrive at a world in which it's a struggle for existence. If I look at the extremes, extreme wealth, I think, can also lead to a kind of social, what was once called anomy, or just kind of valuelessness. It's kind of what the hell. And desperation to poverty can get to the same point. I think as humans, we can be corrupted in a variety of ways. Poverty is one of the ways, as you're pointing out, but also extreme wealth and affluence. And we've been through, in the United States, a model of development that has created around this whatever you want, get it. If it itches, scratch it. If it feels good, do it. It's the consumer model. And it's been thrust upon us in many ways. And this is way beyond the point of the conversation here. But do all of you know the name Sigmund Freud? Sigmund Freud's nephew was a man by the name of Edward Bernays, B-E-R-N-A-Y-S. And Bernays came to the United States and armed with his uncle Sigmund's view of humankind, which wasn't very optimistic about us. And he created the first major advertising agency. And, you know, Freud had thought the structure of the human psyche was there's the id, and that's the place where all our bad stuff, our wants, our hatreds, our lusts, our fears, that's the id. And then there's the ego, the rational, calculating part of the human psyche. And then there's the superego. That's the angelic part. That's the Gandhian part of us. And he realized that advertising should be really aimed at the id. And so you go for the worst. You sell things by appealing to the worst in humans, their fears, their lusts, their, and so forth. And so when he came to the States, in order to sell cars, people weren't buying cars in large enough numbers to keep the industry afloat. He realized that if you make the car an object of sexual appeal, you'll sell more cars. And so they would drape half-clad women over the hood of a car. And so to the male seeing the advertisement, aha, if I own that car, I will be sexually more attractive. Car sales went up. That was Edward Bernays. And one of the things that has driven the unsustainable economy we now have is exactly that kind of thing. It is to prey on people and always hold out this illusion that if they buy this product, they will have solved whatever problem they have. And of course, the system works not by solving problems, but by multiplying wants. And so as long as we are made dependable and dependent consumers, the system works. And imagine an economy that does not have to grow. Imagine that. An economy where human needs, genuine human needs, and Gandhi again made a distinction between needs and greeds. But genuine human needs are met automatically. That's the default setting. So for food and health care and shelter and so forth, those needs are met. But not necessarily all of the want-tos and the wants that we have. But imagine a society in which advertisers paid a tax based on the damage that their product does in the world. And then we took those proceeds and plowed it back into the daily life and to provide the conditions necessary to make a good life for people. We don't suffer lack of food and water and housing and money on this world. We don't. But we suffer the equitable distribution. We suffer from the inequitable distribution of those things. This is, in every way, and going back to her question, is a spiritual issue. It's ethical at its core. But one other note, for those of you who are educators, by the time a student arrives in my class as an 18-year-old young person, they will have seen thousands of advertisements modeled on the thinking of Edward Bernays. Then my job is to get them to think about sustainability. Not easy. because we've trivialized a good bit of life. We've made life simply something that is a consumer fest. Anyway, I'm off on a rant, but thank you for that point.
David, just a last question. Now, you have given us a wonderful presentation of the situation in the United States. What encouraging message can you give the people in this country, where the situation is totally different from the United States? What thought the people can take home with themselves tonight, saying, okay, there is a better future ahead. What can America suggest to us here in India? What we can do better? What is realistically possible?
Well, thank you for that. The news from the United States, in a way, is we have pioneered a model, and we're reporting back from your future that it isn't as good as we thought it would be. So we're kind of the experiment. The message, I think, here is develop on your own terms. Draw from your own culture. And there's a good many of our mistakes you don't have to make. You don't need nearly as much of a national electric grid, which is on your mind the last several days, as we built. And the technology is there to develop distributed energy, develop your own solar capacity, photovoltaic energy. You don't have to run wires all over India. You can avoid a lot of the mistakes that we made. And then I think there's something else here. India has, and I'm a novice in your culture, but this is an ancient culture. You have ancient resources to draw on that we, as a relatively new country, don't have. And there's a different model of development to be built here. You have your own models. You have your own history. And sustainability will look very different here. But thank you very much for that point. The message, I think, is be true to what you are and what you have been, and then be true to the dreams of what India can be, as you describe it. A world, and we can't create something that we can't envision and dream first. But dream of a world that is where people are treated fairly and decently, regardless of who they are, regardless of the age. And it's a world not powered by fossil fuels, and then all the rest, you fill in the blank. Because that'll be different here than it is in the United States. In the United States, we have some unlearning to do. We have our own strengths and weaknesses. And I don't mean to run down the United States they're good and there's bad in all of our cultures. But sustainability isn't one thing. It will be a variety of things. But the end goal has to be equitable. I would hope it's going to be democratic. It's got to be solar powered and so forth. But thank you for that.
I have 2 points to make. First is there's no doubt that sustainability and ethics and spiritual dimension come in order to bring about a equitable, sustainable order, as you were saying. My point is, how would you sell this idea to the governments, especially in the West, which are controlled by powerful corporate interests? And I don't see any ghost of a chance of they relinquishing their selfish and powerful hold on the government in policy making and so on and so forth. Point number 1. Point number 2, coming to our friend about India's model. It is very unfortunate India is blindly aping the Western model. The most stupidest thing Indians could ever do. And the most effective model that India could adopt, and should one day, India will have to do that, is to go to the model articulated by Gandhiji, who said decentralized economy, decentralized socio-economic setup, where instead of mass production, you have millions different centers distributed all over India, produce locally, consume locally, and that is the most effective, sustainable, culturally acceptable model for India. But unfortunately, Gandhi is forgotten, and hypocritical homages are paid to his idol in every public place, and all his ideals are thrown to the winds. And India has no alternative but to go back to the Gandhian model if it is to survive.
If that's two questions, I will try to answer. If it's a statement, I'm inclined to agree with it. On the first, we have an issue of power. You're asking how do we restrain corporate power? The problem legally, if you followed this, and this is now a global issue, is that we've said that corporations, this abstraction called the corporation, and in your own historical memory, you'll remember the East India, so forth. We've said that the corporation is a legal person. And you and I are persons. We're mortal. We're going to die. You can only be in this place. You can't be someplace else simultaneously. You have limited assets. Corporations can be all over the world. They have no particular conscience. They can portray themselves as having a conscience, but they're still always going to be an abstraction. There's no way around it. And so the issue, and this is a debate that came up earlier today, how then do corporations become ethical? And how do you restrain them? And there are good examples. Wipro is one, it seems to me. Ray Anderson's company was another. There are examples of corporations beginning to have a social agenda, what's called the triple bottom line. The issue for us in the States is to change the laws around that, so that you change the taxation and the regulations and so forth, so as to encourage that kind of transition. Because there are companies that have begun to adopt a very different view of their role. And they're taking some part of profits and putting that back into society. They're beginning to account for the full range of their cost in the world. And there are too few examples like that. But imagine if they were to come together in a global network of sustainable, ethical companies. And instead of fighting their battles as a company here versus the system, they begin to come together around a larger global agenda. I think that could be really powerful. And that could be very quick. I mean, imagine partnering with Google, that is now putting a lot of money into solarizing its company and so forth. But there are people who see that old form, the East India Company form, it doesn't work. It never did work well, except for a few people. So imagine people coming together around a very different model of corporations. And that's a battle I think that we have to fight in the States. It's very much part of the current election campaign. On Gandhi, and I agree that there was a different model of development, and it still is. And I think it is, I don't think it's gone, because I think that's one of the influences on my life and lots of people I know. That is very much an influence on the development of what we're calling, what you saw here, the Oberlin Project. Very much part of what we're trying to do. And it's to begin to develop local production, an economy built to needs, food, shelter, energy, clean water, craft work, and so forth, all done locally. If you go to our website, Gandhi's name is not mentioned, but it is there in all but name. The model is still alive. And the strange thing to me, in the last couple of years, a number of conversations with high officials in the U.S. military establishment, and the word resilience has come back over and over again. And no one knows exactly what that word means also, but in contrast to sustainability, which means kind of sustaining something more or less intact indefinitely. Resilience means the capacity to change that thing over time. People in military have become more and more interested in resilient models of security, which means decentralizing things. And it's a model that has Gandhian roots. It has roots back in American history. It has roots that our Republican Party or Democratic Party can appeal to. It's a very different way of describing the human future. Instead of larger centralization, it's even in large cities. It's breaking the cities into neighborhoods and groups and so forth. And the trick, it seems to me, is to develop larger ideas of justice, fairness, decency, and so forth, and peaceableness as we disaggregate into that. And then finally, I would say this, and I thank you again for the points you've made. I think the human future is probably in some ways more Gandhian than it is, what's the other word? Highly centralized. Yeah. And the interesting part also is that's the drift of technology. You know, how many of you own a mainframe computer here? Let me see your hands. You don't have. You couldn't carry it around. You wouldn't want to if you had it. How many of you have a cell phone? Let's see your hands. Small computer? The technology is beginning to decentralize. And if you wanted to put solar collectors on your home or your business or whatever, you can do that as well. And so the technology is allowing us to begin to decentralize in lots of ways. This is part of another talk, but the one fear I think that all of us should share is how do we keep a common sense of humanity as we disaggregate? I think we're already beginning to disaggregate. How do we keep fairness and peacefulness and decency and justice for among ourselves and then for future generations? That's the one issue. But your question is an awfully good question. Thank you for raising that.
So considering the time, we can take 2 more questions. Please.
According to the statistics produced by the United Nations, the top 20% of the people of the world today own, control, enjoy, and decide 82% of the total wealth of the world today. At the same time, the bottom 20% of the people have only 2% of the wealth of the world at their command. If this economic relationship exists in this world, what kind of a sustainable future we can anticipate? This is my question. Without demolishing these statistics, creating a new relationship of human beings, is it possible? And if possible, who will do it? How will you do it? What kind of technology, what kind of methodology we can use?
That's the last question, huh? Well, it's an awfully good question. And I think you're dead center at the biggest issue we have economically and ethically. And if Karl Marx, you all remember Karl Marx, if Karl Marx were here, Karl Marx would take your question and say, I told you so. And in some ways, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I think he's right. On Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I think maybe we could accommodate capital, we can make capitalism green and fair. On Sunday, I don't think about these things. I think the jury, in a sense, is still out. And I think we're in a bit of a race. We're in a race between people who are capitalists to show that capitalism can be green, it can be fair, it can be equitable, and it can spread wealth. And time is running short. And I still think that capitalism on at least Monday, Wednesday, Friday can rise to the challenge. But it can't do it as long as capitalism is dominated by large oil, coal, and extractive companies, mostly extractive companies that take minerals and soil and trees and what? Arms. I think that capitalism, I think, is at war with a different kind of capitalism that's trying to get born. And so we're watching the birth pangs, and we hope it's not an abortion. We hope it's a system that can arise. Now, the challenge you've put out is a global challenge. It's more and more also a challenge internally to the United States. Again, 400 people in the United States control more wealth than the bottom 150 million. And so we are in a race. The model of development that we've had always said that growth would create equity. The growth would be spread. And that hasn't happened. We're decades into this model now. And when Harry Truman, American president, announced his .4 program in 1947, I believe it was, that was the launch of this development model. And it ran roughshod over the world. It was caught up in the battle between Russia or the Soviet Union and the United States and communism and so forth, but it ran over the world. And it's now viral. It's as strong here as it is in New York City and Tokyo and London. But that is the issue. You've raised it. And I don't have an answer for it, except to say that we have to find a way to spread wealth. And I think there are, in our case, back down, if I downsize your question to our little town of Oberlin, Ohio, what we're trying to do is to make a laboratory in this town that shows how you can build sustainability and then scale that up. We have a poverty level in Oberlin of 28% that live at or below the U.S. established poverty level. Now, you can't go hand out money. Our goal is to begin to create worker-owned and locally owned businesses that begin to change all that. And when I put my retirement money goes off to something in the States called TIAA CREF. Don't worry about the name, but it goes someplace. We're trying now to divert retirement funds to create a pool of investment capital for local investment, to invest in local farms, local solarization, the creation of local businesses, local craft work, and so forth. So we're trying to understand how we solve this problem at that level first, and then go after issues of distribution and ownership. If capitalism is such a good idea, then it's good for everybody. Everybody ought to be an owner. And the state that Elaine and I live in has more worker-owned businesses than any other state in the United States. And so that is a model. And that, again, goes back to Gandhi. I mean, Gandhi is alive and well in more ways, kind of working subtly below the surface. But thank you for the question. I think you put your finger on, again, on a very good problem. We had one other question.
Yeah. Yeah, this is sort of related to all the other questions which came before. So we've talked about wonderful projects like, the Oberlin project and, sustainable buildings and a lot of other things. To me, it seems obvious that unless we can somehow reduce consumption, unless people, choose to consume less and not multiply their wants, based on who's that guy and his descendants, the Freud's nephew. So one thing is
Edward Bernays. Remember that name?
Yeah, Bernays. So I mean, Bernays and his creed are all over, right? So to me, it seems sort of obvious that unless we tackle this issue of consumption, reducing individual, say, wants, how is this whole thing going to work? Even if I have, cell phones and technology which will help me to, have disconnected models. So that's not obvious to me. I think the main issue is consumption. We don't have a solution to that, so maybe we are avoiding talking about it too much. So that's one thing. So do you agree that, consumption is the core issue? The second is, if you do agree that consumption is one of the core issues, can this be addressed through any political systems, or is that just impossible? Because Karl Marx and the idea of communism is so appealing, but we don't have any successful example where either communism or capitalism or anybody actually delivered the goods on this.
I was told that when we came here, we'd go to bed very early this morning. Actually, it was 3:30 before we got to bed. And that the questions this afternoon would be really easy questions. It'd be kind of like yes or no kind of questions. So what do we do with consumption? We just don't buy as much stuff. First of all, that is really a great question, and it fits all the others in a way. Several years ago, Elaine and I we were invited to go to a meeting that was sponsored by the Prime Minister of Bhutan, Bhutan, as you know, is trying to develop the measure called net national happiness. And when I got there and we had dinner with the Prime Minister, I said, well, you know, why do you want Americans at a meeting like this? So we know about stuff. We don't know about happiness. We operate in a theory that stuff brings happiness, but you know, we all know it doesn't work that way. I won't describe his answer, but the issue is in part that the economy was pegged to something called growth. If growth doesn't happen, we believe it all collapses. And if you've studied Western economics, which has also gone viral, it's the model for the whole world, that growth has to happen. E.F. Schumacher, whose wonderful little essay called Buddhist Economics back in the early 70s, E.F. Schumacher once said when in his 60s, not long before he died, that if he grows, disaster. I could say the same thing. If I grow, it's a disaster because most of it's going to be more there. If my grandson, who's 12, grows, that's a good thing. But the model of the economy is that there is no limit. And so if you've had economics, microeconomics and macroeconomics don't calibrate, and they certainly collectively don't calibrate with the way the Earth works as a physical system. We've got a problem. And if I put an ecologist that's studying Earth trends, climate change, carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, and so forth, and let's say an economist at in the cockpit of an airplane, imagine this. The economist is reading gauges that say, hey, we're going just fine. We're at 35,000 feet. This is terrific. The growth is occurring and so forth. The ecologist on the other side of the cockpit saying, hey, this is a disaster. We're about to crash. We're headed down. You can see Earth can't sustain 7 billion, 8 billion, 9 billion people that live like Americans do. And so if you were a passenger on that plane, you'd want them to resolve those problems real quickly. Are we crashing or are we doing just fine? And consumption is the thing that drives it. And then enter into this debate. In the last 10 years or so, or a little bit longer, a number of social scientists have gotten together and studied what makes people happy. And so there's a shelf full of books, I've got about that many of them, that have delved into this. And lo and behold, they describe what I mentioned before. Stuff doesn't make us happy. What makes us happy is human relationships. Writing good poetry, playing a great cricket game. You know, it's all the things that we do with each other. Beyond some fairly minimal level of income, stuff doesn't make us happy. And it's just, duh. We know that. But the system is geared to buying more stuff. And buying stuff you don't need. And buying more stuff that's packaging. You never want to buy the packaging anyway, but you buy the whole thing. And we believe that that is what keeps an economy alive. So, two comments. One is, how do you change this? There are some ways to change it. Going after corporations and their supply chains. Walmart, in our case, is now a global corporation, has begun to work upstream with its 80,000 suppliers to minimize a lot of stuff. There are companies like the Patagonia clothing company that says don't buy clothes. And if you need something, you know, borrow from somebody else or get a hand-me-down. If you gotta buy and you're otherwise going to be naked, then come on in and we'll sell you something. That's a good business model. I actually do pretty well at it. But it seems to me that a good bit of this is going to have to occur like the effort. Like most social efforts, it's going to have to be you and me just walk away from it. And people begin to consume less in the obvious awareness that this system is a fraud and a cheat beyond some pretty minimal level. And we are, as all of you know, individually, probably most of us in this room, wealthier and wealthier, but in the public, we're more and more impoverished. Our water is tainted, our air is dirty, our parks are crumbling, our bridges are falling apart. And we have this private wealth, public squalor problem. And it is growing worse in the United States. One last comment, and I think the worst part about this is if I take Edward Bernays, and I put him in this debate. What Bernays has equipped advertising companies to do is to go after little children. And so they're branded very quickly. And imagine, there's a slide I sometimes use where I put 4 curves on the screen. So I've got the Coca-Cola, and all of you know Coca-Cola, right? And then there's the Nike swoosh, or for you it goes like that. Then there's the McDonald's logo. And then there's the Keeling curve you saw there. And I ask audiences, how many of you recognize those curves? Well, everybody recognizes the first 3, but the Keeling curve, no. And I used to point out that, you know, one of those can kill you. Until somebody in the audience pointed out, no, 4 of them can kill you. Coca-Cola can do it, McDonald's can do it, and so forth. But imagine going after advertising with an advertising tax, and I'm perfectly serious about that. That if you want to clog people's arteries, fill our air with dirt, fill our minds of our children with trash, and so forth, you can pay. We'll let you do it, but you're going to pay for it. And tax that to undo some of the disadvantages. But thanks for asking, and thanks to all of you.
David, thank you so much for a wonderful lecture. And I think, and if something could beat that, you know, the wonderful question and answer session. We are lucky to have him here with Elaine. And we're actually lucky that he's here with us for the next few days. You know, tomorrow you're at the university and then back. Yes, please.
Is the Wipro doing something on experiment scale, as David Orr was saying, is happening in America for sustainable development? Some experiments?
You know, I have... in front of David, can I speak on this issue? So... Yeah, so as much as possible, so, you know, let's say all our buildings, I think you would have seen that US Green Building Certification that he talked about in the Oberlin context. All our buildings that we make, they're either gold or platinum certified, which all of our buildings that we make, they're all green buildings. They're either platinum or gold certified on the same green building certification that David was talking about. That doesn't mean that it anyway holds the same high standard that Oberlin has. You know, we can't say that water in and water out. It's not entirely powered by, you know, solar electricity, but very significantly, very, very significantly, right? We have the largest number of green campuses in the entire country. 17 of our campuses are actually platinum or gold certified. So we are trying, and I can tell you this, I mean, since you asked me this question, it is very hard. It is very hard. It is very hard because of many reasons, but it's very hard because it does take money, right? So therefore, a corporation has to take a decision that for us, we will invest money into things, right? So I think what we'll do is we'll talk with tea outside. Okay, we'll do that. So thank you so much, David. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here as a gesture of our, or token of our gratitude. So we'll break now. Thank you so much.